everybody. My name's Anna, and I am in long-term recovery. I just want to be real brief and share my story with you tonight because there's so many speakers. But I really want to share about the hope that I've gained in recovery, and tell you a little bit about how hopeless I was before I knew what recovery was. 10 years ago, I was at the end of my rope with my addiction. I was at the worst place that you could possibly be, and just a little glimpse of what that looks like. Every day that I woke up, I had to use. I didn't have a choice. With that, I had to do whatever it took. I maintained a job for a really long time, and eventually I wiped out my bank account, and I ended up screwing my job over, and I just, didn't have a job at the end. So then I had to start ripping and running on the streets, and for me, it started with hurting the people that were closest to me first. That was easy, and it seemed to be there was always a number of people available for me to do that to. So, looking back, I can remember the first time I didn't have money, and I had to steal. And I went into my parents' house and went into their garage, and I took an inventory of what they had and thought, what am I going to take? Because I didn't know anything about stealing. I had worked, and I had a bank account, and I had money, and I bought everything that I needed to use. And I remember looking in the garage, just not even knowing where to begin, I didn't know that the chainsaw was the most expensive thing. And I can't remember exactly what I took that day, but I'll never forget that feeling of what I was willing to pay to get one because I didn't have money. And that was the beginning of it, and it just got a lot worse. In my using, I would share drugs with people that had never used heroin because they had money, and I wanted them to get that feeling and have that rush because I wanted them tomorrow to come back and want more just like I did. And so therefore many people that hadn't used before used because of me, because of the desperation that I had to share my addiction with someone else so that they could feed me the next day, and that's all I cared about. And one of the people that I did that with was my best friend, and about a month after I gave her her first line of heroin, she overdosed on Oxycontin and died. And she was 17 years old. And I can remember being at her funeral and all the young kids that were there. It was just young kids everywhere, and I can remember all of us, all we cared about was leaving there and going and getting high. That was all we talked about. We went, we paid our respects, but after that we were out to go party. And I always had guilt knowing that I had given her her first line of heroin, and that's where it started. So for me, what happened in my story is that I crossed lines, and everything that I said that I wouldn't do, I would do. I would be with someone that, for instance, somebody that would have stole a check from their mom, and I thought I would never steal a check from my mom, and in 2 weeks I'd be stealing checks for my mom. Or I'd be with somebody that was sleeping with someone to get drugs, and I thought that is the worst thing that you could ever do. How could you ever do that to your body for drugs? And in 2 months, I'd be doing that with my body to get drugs. And there was just no limit at the end to what I was willing to pay to get my fix. And this is the light to hope, and at the end of my addiction, I was just so hopeless. I can remember days that I looked in the mirror and I promised myself I wasn't going to use today. I promised that today I'm not going to use. And that didn't work. And then I said, well, today I'm not going to use this. And that didn't work. And then I said, I'm just going to use on Thursdays and Fridays. That didn't work. If there was a way to figure out how I could use successfully without going to jail, without having court dates, without having all the consequences of stealing from my family and what I had to go do out on the streets to feed my fix, I would have found it. Because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how I could do it. So I ended up in rehab, and when I was in rehab, looking back, as hopeless as I was, I I didn't know what rehab meant. I didn't know what the 12 steps were. I didn't know what recovery looked like. I didn't know what recovery programs were. And I can remember thinking, I don't want to use and I don't want to be clean. And I was in the middle, and it was a tough spot to be in. And I thought, why does this have to happen? Why do I have to keep getting into all this trouble and making all these mistakes? Why can't I just use without all these consequences? And I found myself in rehab finally. Some way I was able to be honest to myself and admit that I'm an addict and I can't use drugs. And one is too many and 1,000's never enough. And I left there with the intention that I was going to go on the road to recovery and stay clean and do whatever it took, just like I did in my using. And prior to getting to that point of rehab, I also felt very helpless. I felt fear all the time because I had hurt and harmed so many people. I had robbed so many people. I had robbed drug dealers. Somebody was always looking for me. I couldn't go anywhere. I'd have to hide who I was, go in a different car. And I just had a heavy amount of fear that I had to carry around with me as a result of my actions from using. And the fear that I had, it pushed me to ask for help. And I revealed to my parents that I was a heroin addict and that I needed help. And they weren't too surprised. They had asked me several times if I was using heroin, and I denied it and made whatever excuse I could come up with to, make them believe that what they thought wasn't true. They didn't ask very many questions after that, and I stayed away from them because I'd find somewhere else to go and somewhere else to party because they knew what they knew, So I went to them and finally told them that I needed help, and they didn't know what to do with me either. They suggested that I stay home. I don't go hang out with those bad people. I don't go hang out with those bad places. If I'm home, I'm safe. They'll know where I am. They'll know what I'm doing. And I was willing to do that because I was willing for my life to get better. And I didn't even know what better looked like. I just knew that my way wasn't working. And I felt a huge relief that somebody in my life that loved me and cared about my life was there and knew my secret and was willing to help me. And the next day I woke up and I was feeling really good. I had a weight lifted off my shoulders. I just felt amazing. And then I ended up experiencing withdrawals and not feeling so amazing. And I called my mom, and she was at work and my dad was at work, and I just told them, I've been up, I've been trying to do the right thing, and it's a lot harder than I thought. And they asked me to go get help at the emergency room. And my story, at the end, I didn't have money to go to the emergency room, and if that didn't work out, I would go get dope. I had enough money to go get dope, and it shows my willingness back then because I went to the emergency room, and that was my first act of willingness to get better. And it seems like it's really not a big deal, but looking back, it was. And unfortunately, at that time, the emergency room wasn't able to help me. There was a methadone clinic down the street. This was in Elkton, not far from the hospital, and they told me they couldn't help me to go to the methadone clinic. And I decided that I wasn't going to go get on methadone, and I ended up getting on dope. And that night, didn't make it back home, didn't come back home for a couple days, and I ended up getting into an incident 2 days later with the police. They were raiding a house that I went to get drugs, and they came after my car, and I pulled off, and they came after me. And I didn't recognize them as the police because they were wearing regular clothes, and they were doing a house raid at the time. But they fired their gun, and he ended up in the hood of my car and just shooting, and it was crazy. Lots of bullets were fired, lots of bullets hit my car, and I ended up getting shot in the process. But I wanted help, and I had asked for help. And looking back, it's like, it's so hard to wrap my head around somebody that was willing to go and get help that, I was turned away. So, but I also look at it like everything happens for a reason, and that's what it took. It took that to happen to me, to wake me up, to make me realize how close I was to death. It made me be truthful to myself that this is really what it's worth to get high. This is the price that you're really willing to pay. And I wasn't willing to pay that price anymore. So I went to rehab and I got clean, and that was, I've been clean for over 10 years from heroin, and my sobriety date from every drug. Thank you guys. My sobriety date is July 9th. I dibbled and dabbed a little bit, here and there. I had one foot in the rooms, one foot in the world, and I had to totally surrender. I had to be true to myself and say, this isn't working. Because one day, I'm going to leave the rooms and I'm going to step out with both feet into the world, and I'm going to be in a world of trouble, and I might not make it back. And I fully surrendered whenever I was true to myself with that. And I've just been rocking it out ever since. And life today, as hopeless as it was today, it is beyond anything that I could imagine. And if I would have predicted in my life what would have happened, and the blessings that I've received, and the women that I have in my life, and fellowship, and I could just go on and on and on, I would have cut myself short. There's nothing, what I'm experiencing is nothing like what I ever could have imagined. And just to give you guys a little glimpse of how there's still this little piece of me, like the old me that exists, and no matter what I do, she won't go away. The other day in my house, I found $160 hidden underneath something in my house. And it was for somebody to come in and get. That was their pay for the day. And my first thought, which I have a sponsor that told me my first thought's wrong, so I recognize that. My first thought was, holy moly, $160, like, wow. But I thought, oh, somebody might not remember they put this here. In this program, I've gained tools to be able to, go through that and be honest with myself and honest with others. So this is a church that I attend. I recently became a member of this church through a class and getting baptized here. And a few years ago, I had my second daughter. I wasn't doing all the things that I should do in my recovery. I had stopped going to meetings. I kind of got disconnected from people. It was just hard with her being little, and she was a little bit needy. And so I ended up coming here and coming to Celebrate Recovery. I found their newspaper ad, and they offered childcare, so I figured I don't have an excuse. I can go to a meeting and I don't have to worry about my children. And I came here, and I called the number, and they were expecting me, and I was welcomed by so many people that attend this church and attend Celebrate Recovery. And what I can tell you about Celebrate Recovery is that I came here a mess. I hadn't used drugs, but I was spiritually empty, and I had lost trust in a lot of people that I had lost in my support group for my other meetings, and they didn't care about all that. They just loved on me, and they welcomed me with open arms, and they let me be who I was. And I thought I couldn't come to church or Celebrate Recovery meeting like that. I thought that they would judge me and look down on me because of this or because of that. And from my experience, that hasn't been the case. So I'm very grateful for Celebrate Recovery. It's given me another run at this thing. An amazing blessing that I have to share is that the officer that shot me, he called looking for me, which it blew my mind. I was in the room when somebody else got the phone call, and he just said that he had heard that I was doing really well, and he thought maybe we could meet up. He said that Governor Hogan had given him a lot of opportunities to help addicts in recovery ways, and he asked me if I'd want to go alongside of him and help him. And we met in his office, and this incident happened in Cecil County in Perryville, Maryland, which is not anywhere close by to here. And this officer that contacted me barracks is in Centerville, and he lives around here, and I could have bumped into him at 7-Eleven and wouldn't have known who he was. So it was no coincidence in that to me, you know. And you know, I don't judge him, and I didn't have any hard feelings towards him because my life, because of what happened, has been amazing. But it was definitely a miracle to have that happen in my situation, where a police officer would be willing to even wonder where I am and what I'm doing 10 years later. So I want to thank everybody in our community that donated to this Lights of Hope event. I think it's amazing. There's so many people that want to do something, they're just not sure what to do. And I think everybody just stepped up with the food, the drinks, just every way that people helped out. And I want to thank you guys so much for coming here and supporting this. So thank you.